What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Crockneck, and I've decided to do another States of Metal, and I'm doing one that's maybe a little bit different. I decided to do one that doesn't necessarily have a scene, but does have some metal bands I want to talk about. So we're going to go to West Virginia and check out some bands from West Virginia. I figured this would be kind of a good test run for, again, a state that doesn't necessarily have a scene, but definitely has some cool metal bands. So what do I know about West Virginia? Well, it's one of the few states that actually formed during the Civil War. In 1863, I guess the people in the western half of Virginia decided, hey, this is the time to split. And the rest of Virginia was like, really? Now? Like, we're kind of in the middle of something that's pretty damn important. But I assume the people in West Virginia were very adamant, so the rest of Virginia said, here, take this lumpy coal-filled section of Virginia that was really mountainous, and you can just have that. By the way, what are you going to call this new state? West Virginia. How absolutely clever. I've actually been there before. I did some tours of Civil War battlefields in high school, and man, I tell you, some of the places around there, I think they still think that war is going on. It's a little rustic, to say the least. It is absolutely beautiful. Like, the rolling mountains are really cool, the forests. It is the most mountainous state in the United States in terms of, like, ratio to flatlands to mountainous lands. It's all fucking mountainous. It is all in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. I know that John Denver seemed to really like the state, and so did the Mothman. And it is home to at least one side of one of the most famous family feuds in U.S. history with the Hatfields and McCoys. I believe the whole thing started over the ownership of a pig, which is pretty Appalachian, if you ask me. I also know because of the collapse of the coal industry, there's a lot of, like, creepy ghost towns there. There's some fierce Silent Hill vibes going on. It's rustic, but, you know, the mountains are nice at least. But they also have some pretty cool metal bands. And, like, this is definitely going to go into, like, stuff that is not just focused on one genre. I would say the one genre that did pop up on here was a little bit more towards the stoner metal side. But there's some other interesting stuff in there too, and let's just get this started. Karma to Burn. Wild, Wonderful Purgatory. This is their second album, came out in 1999. This band has an interesting history in terms of starting off. They started off as an instrumental band, which they continued most of their career as an instrumental band, but when they initially got signed to Roadrunner, they wanted them to have a singer, and that was kind of against what they were doing to begin with, but they got one. They put out one album. I honestly haven't heard that album because I only knew about them as this instrumental stoner metal band. But I guess that album didn't take off, and they ended up leaving Roadrunner and then just continued on as a three-piece instrumental band. And it started with this album, which this album, and honestly all their albums, are essentially just jam sessions. Just kind of riff it out. Lots of groove, lots of killer bass lines, just fun songs. And a fun thing about this band in terms of almost every release is the fact that all of their songs are just a number. But it doesn't go like track 1 is 1, track 2 is 2, track 1 is 20 in this case, and then 1 pops up much later on this album. So it's kind of an interesting, quirky thing that carried on throughout their entire career, but I love this album. This album, I would say, has maybe a little bit more aggressive guitar tone to it. The later albums would continuously get warmer and more fuzzy, but this one is definitely a little bit more crunchy, and it's mostly stoner rock, but they also pull from other stuff too. Like, there's a little bit of, like, more doom-oriented stuff. Like, the song 3 has some decidedly more ominous, sort of mysterious, kind of spacey vibes to it, and it's a little bit sludgier sounding. But songs like 31 and 8, again, it's kind of weird just saying numbers instead of actual song titles. Those songs get a little bit more, I wouldn't say like groove metal, but kind of similar to Helmet in some regards. Like, it's just a bone-crunching, simple riff that carries on. There's, like, minimal transitions. It kind of just grooves it out. And I think that is a really, like, unique thing about this band in terms of, like, their sound. It feels like you're sitting in on a jam session and they're essentially just kind of riffing it out. Like, start with a beat, start with a riff, and then just kind of keep building on and just see where the song takes you. And I think it's cool that this band is still really expressive in terms of, like, shifting around the mood of a song. You can still feel that even without a vocalist to sort of, like, guide you along with, like, you know, lyrics or, like, different vocal cadences or styles. Good instrumental bands know how to do that. Now, sadly, this band is unfortunately defunct as of 2021, and it is due to a very tragic reason. Their guitarist, founding member, William Meekum, actually died in 2021 from injuries sustained from a fall Sucks. I've been a fan of this band pretty much since this release. I didn't get it when it initially came out, but as soon as I heard it, I was like, dude, there's nothing about this that I don't like. But yeah, the band decided to call it quits after 2021, and I hope the other guys in the band decide to carry on in some sort of fashion in other projects, because I really like what this album, and I would say their entire career is about. Just fucking riff it out and have fun. But yeah, if you have never jammed this, strongly recommend it. I recommend pretty much all their albums. Their second album, Almost Heathen, was almost the one I went with, but this is what got me started, so this is, you know, the one I chose here, and it's absolutely awesome. Just check out pretty much anything they released. Again, I still haven't heard the first one, but I can't imagine it doesn't have riffs and groove, and that is the main thing I love about this band. So yeah, check it out. Byzantine, and They Shall Take Up Serpents. This is the second album from this Charleston thrash metal, groove metal band. It's kind of a hard band to describe in terms of their sound. It is definitely a blend of things, but I would say very much like a blend of bands like Gojira and Lamb of God, and I would even say some Meshuggah in there too. I love this band. I got into them with their first album, The Fundamental Component, but it was this album that really solidified my fandom. I absolutely love the riff work in here. This band has such an interesting knack for songwriting and employing dynamics that are used a lot, but cleverly. Like, of course, there are tons of syncopated grooves all over here, you know, very much along the lines of, again, Gojira and definitely Meshuggah, but they mix in a lot of killer thrash riffs too. So it doesn't necessarily just stay one constant breakdown the entire time. The opening track, Justitia, opens up with like just a syncopated gallop. And it's kind of cool to hear them go like a little bit off time on the riff, but then it goes into these cool crawling thrash riffs and very just dramatic over-the-top vocals. Chris Ojeda has such an interesting voice, going from deep growls to harsh screams and these very wild, clean vocals that are kind of outlandish, but really kind of fun. But it's their songwriting that I absolutely love in here. Lots of cool dynamics, lots of, you know, clean playing, which kind of breaks up the heavier riffs every now and then. Like, my favorite track on here is still probably Ancestry of the Antichrist. The opening snare rolls and this big thrashy riff that kicks it off, like, it comes in very melodic but very furious, breaks into some really killer, like, you know, fun off-time grooves. But when you get to the bridge of this song, there's this whole quiet section with clean guitars and like hand drums or bongos, like instantly kind of just chills it down, but you can sense that something's coming, and it goes in this wild fucking lead bridge, which the leads on here are fucking awesome. Shreddy as hell, but very melodic. I think both guitarists are doing leads on here, and I think you can kind of pick it out, at least on Ancestry. Like, the first lead is very shreddy, and then it kind of goes in this more melodic section after that. That might be the change. I'm not entirely sure. That might be one lead. Either way, it's one of my favorites on this album. But that melodic sense and that clean playing really does a lot for this album overall, especially on songs like Temporary Temples and, surprisingly, Redneck War, which doesn't sound like it's going to be a very pretty song, but it's very pummeling, but it's driven by melody. And it isn't as though this band doesn't get ridiculously heavy with the pummeling fucking chugs that are on the Rat Eaters and Salem Ark. There's some stuff on there that is almost akin to Meshuggah's Bleed. Like, it's just furious. And the drum performance on here is absolutely amazing, which unfortunately brings me to yet another tragedy here. Sadly, 2021 was a rough year for West Virginia metal bands because their drummer Matt Wolf sadly passed that year too. Unfortunately, he had some issues with substance abuse and it took him, and it sucks because he was an awesome drummer. I'm sure he was a fucking great dude to the people that knew him. I didn't ever get a chance to see this band. Either way, it sucks. No one wants to lose a friend to that sort of shit, and I imagine it was tough for the band to go on. Their album after this, Oblivion Beckons, was pretty solid, but they broke up before I think that album was actually released, but then reformed years later. They are still around. They are still putting out albums. I look forward to hearing more from them, but yeah, this one was the one that really just cemented my fandom. This is an absolutely fantastic album. If you love killer thrashy riffs, syncopated grooves, fucking gnarly breakdowns, leads, like, it's pretty much got a great fucking metal checklist here. Definitely check this album out, and just check out Byzantine in general. Horseburner The Theif. This is the third album from this Parkersburg stoner metal act. Came out in 2019, and this one was almost on my year-end list for 2019. I picked this up on a whim just because it was on Ripple Music. I like a lot of their stuff. They put out a lot of killer stoner metal. And yeah, I was really blown away. This is stoner metal with, like, I don't know, like a bit of sludge metal and a fuck ton of melody. This band has a lot of moments on here that sound very similar to, I would say, Mastodon, definitely Baroness. There's a lot of pretty, like, almost kind of classic rock, classic heavy metal harmonies on here in terms of the guitar work. But it does get blisteringly heavy like early Mastodon, and I would even say High on Fire on here. This album opens up with the title track, which is more or less an intro, but it's this cool, steady build of like just epic guitar melodies into a giant fucking song called A Joyless King. And man, the riffs on here are just fucking great. I love the guitar tone. It's a little bit thicker. It snarls. Doesn't necessarily have all the warmth of like a lot of stoner metal, but I like that it is a little bit chunkier. And man, when it comes down to melodies, these guys just fucking kill it. The vocals on here are very gruff but tuneful, but they do a lot of vocal harmonies as well. And man, does that really work on choruses, because the choruses on here feel particularly strong, like very emotive, very heartfelt. And couple that with the very like bluesy leads that pop on here. There's a lot of heart on this album. Like you can just really feel it. And atmosphere too. Atmosphere is almost kind of more akin to like post-metal. Like it's very lush, it's very open sounding. I don't know if you can call this like post-stoner metal, but in some of the longer songs with the more atmospheric touches like The Oak or The Fisherman's Vow or Fathoms, like it just has this giant open sound. And for the most part, this is a very energetic album. Like it really doesn't get slow or drony on here. There's a lot of intensity, like it keeps driving the songs. Even at its most subdued, which is probably Seas Between, which is an interlude, I can't bitch. It's really awesome, clean guitar playing. It's not just like some droning noise or like a weird little setup track or anything like that. It is kind of its own piece, but it shows off their clean playing and once again, their knack for melody. And I like that you get extremes from both sides. Like you get some very melodic stuff, but you also get like some more intense stuff. Like Fathoms has some like High on Fire, like kind of D-beat driven stuff, and so does Drowning Bird, and it even peppers in some blast beats. I love this album. This was an absolute pleasure to return to. I need to get more of their stuff, and I hope this band is still around, still putting out killer music, because this was, again, close to my 2019 year-end list, but that year had a lot of killer stuff, and well, I mean, every year we end up finding a ton of killer stuff, and I think I only did like 25 that year. But yeah, this is absolutely fantastic. If you're a fan of Baroness, especially, and I would definitely say Mastodon, definitely check this band out. Killer release. Zao, The Fear Is What Keeps Us Here. This is the 8th album from this then Parkersburg metalcore act. They actually moved to Pennsylvania, I don't know, probably a few years after the formation. I had to kind of reach on some of these, but this band did form in West Virginia, so I'm fucking counting them. Anyway, pretty much metalcore legends. Like if you're into metalcore, you definitely know Zao. I do think that this is definitely a more obscure pick for me, just in terms of like some of their more legendary early releases, or even some of their like really good recent releases. But I thought this one was kind of an interesting turning point in their career, so this is the one I went with. Now this band has always been pretty much defined as a Christian metalcore act, and I would say that is definitely accurate to a point, and I think this album is the one that sort of moved away from that. Even the band themselves don't identify as necessarily a Christian metalcore group anymore. They just, you know, describe themselves as a metalcore group, which is fucking fine. And I think that had a lot to do with this album, namely the themes on here. Their themes before were definitely very Christian, just like talking about stuff in life from a Christian perspective. This was just more or less talking about their themes through like more of a just straightforward, I'm a person in the world perspective. And this comes after a reasonably big album for them, The Funeral of God, which definitely saw them shift into more melodic territory, like a little bit closer to that Killswitch Engage sound. This one got them back to being raw and noisy. And that is partially due to the fact they had Steve Albini produce it, and this thing sounds raw and vicious. I would even say like there's elements of grindcore and noise on here. Lots of dissonant riffs, very squealy and just kind of disgusting, but also pockets of melody. The crawling riffs that open up Physician Heal Thyself are absolutely amazing and are kind of like a staple of their sound. Like they do that sort of thing all the time. Like the riffs just sort of just kind of slither through the song and, you know, get to some really noisy breakdowns. The drums in here sound gigantic. Steve went for some very raw production, especially even on Dan's vocals. The vocals sound like they're being shouted from the front of the room. There's not a lot of processing on them. Like they sound very natural. And he's got such a raw, throaty scream too. Like it's really nasty sounding. It sounds like he's got it in for his larynx, honestly. This album is very fast paced. Again, like some more grindy D-beat, sort of like punky elements. There are groovy pockets. There's like giant breakdowns in here for damn sure. Namely on the song Pudgy Young Blondes with Lobotomy Eyes. But the fast pace of this album really doesn't take a break until you get to like the 7th track, which is called There Is No Such Thing as Paranoia. I beg to differ. I mean, this came out in 2006 on Ferret Records. At that point, a lot of metalcore bands were in love with the weirdly ironic song titles, and believe me, this album is fucking full of them. I have been a fan of this band for a while, but this was like kind of an interesting turning point for me with the band because I was kind of starting to get out of the whole metalcore thing, like was moving more towards like death metal, melodic death metal more. But when I heard this one versus Funeral of God, again, that one being a little bit more accessible, I was like, no, I like this direction. And they continue to use stuff that really they kind of honed on this album and a lot of their future releases. But again, this band continues to grow in terms of their sound overall. Their last two albums, I think, are flat out amazing. Especially the Crimson Corridor, their last album. I think that album's absolutely fantastic and almost kind of borders on post-metal in spots, and I think it works really well with their sound. This album, shifting to heavier, more visceral stuff, and sort of shifting the themes overall too, away from just, you know, stuff that is centered on Christianity, I think it was a good move, and it kept me a fan. So yeah, if you love just kind of just dark, sinister, but heavy and kind of grindy metalcore, definitely check this out. This is a solid album. Brimstone Coven, self-titled. This is the debut album from this Wheeling, West Virginia stoner metal / stoner rock. Honestly, it's more stoner rock, but I wanted to bring it up because I absolutely love this album. Now, this band is one of the projects of the very industrious Andrew DeCagna. He's also in Iron Flame and also in Nachachwin, which I know Nachachwin has been getting a lot of cool press here lately. I still need to get that album. It's been on my list for a while. I just haven't gotten around to it. But he's on bass and backup vocals on here, and I actually saw this band play here in Toledo, and I was absolutely hooked. This band is pure Black Sabbath and pentagram worship. And oh my god, the vocal harmonies on here are amazing. Now, at this time, they had their old frontman, Big John Williams, which he's definitely big. I met him actually at the bar at that show, and he's about as tall as your average oak tree. An absolute mountain of a human being with this amazing, clean voice. Like, he crooned so well, and the vocal harmonies between he and Andrew were absolutely fantastic. This album has great old school analog production. The guitars are warm and fuzzy. There's a ton of groove to all these songs. Very similar to like Clutch, but spookier. Or I would even say like Ghost's first album, like it kind of has that vibe, albeit like I think the vocal harmonies are way stronger, especially in the song The Black Door. Oh my god, it's very haunting, but very alluring, and very meat and potatoes, and it definitely wears its influences on its sleeve. But their influences are awesome, so I have no problem with that. In fact, I would even say the song Behold the Anunnaki actually has like just a slight nod to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, or maybe like a National Acrobat off that album. There's something about that riff or melody on there that it's so Iommi-ish, it almost sounds like it might have been borrowed. But I mean, if you're gonna borrow from someone with riffs, then borrow from Iommi by all means. But this whole album is just about riffs and melodies, great vocal hooks, not a lot of variety in terms of like getting outside of that sound. But honestly, for me, it was like, why would I want to get away from this? This is all so enjoyable and fun. I love bands like Clutch, you know, that's just good, put it on and just sort of rock out music, and that is exactly what this is. Another couple of standouts for me on here, Blood on the Wall. There's like a little bit of like Texas blues, like a little bit of like ZZ Top to that song too that I love. And Lord and Master, which might arguably be the most metal-ish song. Like it feels a little bit more dark and sinister, and I think the riffs are a little bit heavier. And there's also a really solid lead on here, which a lot of this is just about the riffs and the melodies. You don't get a tremendous amount of leads, so that lead really did stand out. And I love the clean section at the end of Vying in particular. I think that is just particularly haunting, but also beautiful, which is pretty much the whole vibe of this. Now, this actually includes a bunch of bonus tracks from their first EP and I think one of their demos, and they're also amazing too, which made the runtime of this one album, since it includes all that stuff, about like 70 plus minutes, but it was all really worth it. This is just a great stony jam. It has good rockers on it, but there's like a cool sort of chill vibe to the entire thing. I love it. And honestly, I like pretty much all of their stuff. Now, Big John no longer is with the band, but they have another solid singer in there and they're still putting out killer stuff. But yeah, this is the one that got me started on them. Definitely check this out. If you're a big Sabbath and Pentagram fan, I can't imagine you not liking this. So yeah, check it out. Wrathchild America 3D. This is the second and, as it stands, final album from this Martinsburg thrash act. Now, they did move to Baltimore later. In fact, I think they only started in West Virginia, but again, pickings were kind of slim for this date, and this band did start in West Virginia as far as I've seen, so I'm counting them. And holy shit, this album's nuts. I think this is one of the coolest, like, weird genre-hopping thrash albums I own. Now, an interesting thing to note is this is where Shannon Larkin, you know, formerly of Amen and current Godsmack drummer, got his start, I believe. And dude, his drum work on here is absolutely fantastic, which makes me think he's definitely slumming it in a butt rock band like Godsmack. I mean, he's been slumming it in that band since, like, what, 2003? So, I mean, a paycheck's a paycheck. I'm sure he's doing fine. But on here, man, he is killing it. And with the amount of genre hopping that is on this album, man, he really showcases everything he can do. But honestly, the entire band is fucking killing on here. Like, this is such a wildly creative and fun album. And I think it kind of came at a point where they knew that, all right, thrash metal is starting to die out. We need to do something different, but we also want to have some fun with it. And they definitely did. The opening track, 3D Man, is almost sort of like a spazzy, bouncy Voivod song. But you get to the next track, Spy, and all of a sudden you are getting a swing song. Like, it's a metal swing song that, honestly, it sounds like something that Volbeat would do now, but I think this band kind of did it better years ago. But through every track on here, you have just wild shifts. Like, it sounds like it could have been written by a ton of different bands all sort of working together and throwing in their influences, but this was one band just kind of going all over the place, especially in the instrumental prego. Holy shit, that song goes almost everywhere it possibly can within 3 minutes. You go from thrash to, like, doom metal to neoclassical to blues to even some country twang on there. It's an absolutely nuts song. And while it is, like, jarring in its shifts, it's just very infectious. Like, I was really just kind of drawn in by how they fucking implemented all this and how they did all the transitions. Like, this is stuff that, you know, BT Bam does now and does exceedingly well. But this was done back in '91 by probably a band that no one expected them to do that, because I've only listened to like a little bit of their first album, and it's good, but it's not nearly as creative as this one. You could almost make an argument that this is a prog metal album in some respects, like Surrounded by Idiots, which is a great song title and still very accurate, has like a little bit of a funk element to it. On the song Desert Grins, not only do you get some like really clever, thrashy, fun riffs, you also get a talk box solo, which is almost kind of unheard of in thrash metal, but, you know, I'm pretty sure it's been done before, but not as just cleverly fun as this. Hell, What's Your Pleasure is essentially an ode to, I would say, Hellraiser 2. This album is just flat out fun. I brought it up in a collection update forever ago because I kind of picked it up on a whim because I wanted to check out some stuff by this band because I've heard a lot of like old thrash fans talk about this album. And yeah, you guys are right. This is just a fucking gem of an album. I still really need to like sit down and listen to their first one, but I know I love this album. I think this is just some wildly creative music, and maybe at some point we'll do a retro review on the band itself. I do believe they have reunited, maybe just under a different banner, or at least they reunited under a different banner, became a different band, but have become Wrathchild America again. I don't know. I know that I really like this album. I know if you're just looking for some just creative, crazy fucking thrash metal, definitely check this out. It's just fucking awesome. And finally, gonna close off with something a little bit more underground with Seven Planets and their album Explorer. This is the third album from this all-instrumental stoner rock, stoner metal band. Came from Beckley, West Virginia. And while it's kind of similar to Karma to Burn, this is definitely more of that sort of desert rock sound. Like, this is the real stony stuff. Like, the riffs are energetic and fun, but there's a lot more spacey atmosphere in here. Like, this kind of has that kind of like fun Caius, Fu Manchu vibe to a lot of it, albeit without vocals. Most of this, I would say, is a little bit more chill outside of maybe the last track, The Buzzard. That one's a little bit more intense, a little bit more riffy, but a lot of this is just sort of like spacey and cosmic. A lot of this is kind of about atmosphere and mood. Like, the title track has really cool, like, spacey analog synths. The song Plain Truth in a Homespun Dress, which sounds like that's a song only played on a banjo, is actually, again, another moody, interesting song. There's a really cool delay effect on the opening guitars. Like, it just kind of sets a cool mood. And all this feels like very just kind of jammed in the studio. Again, kind of similar to Karma to Burn. But I do like the fact that on the song Grissom, there's a false start. Like, they kind of get started and was like, nope, missed it right there. We got to start that over. And they kept it in there, which makes it feel like more intimate and personal. Like, you're just kind of sitting there in the studio or in the jam space, just, you know, watching them kind of figure this one out and just kind of hit that groove, like, all right, there it is. That's what they're doing. The production on here is, again, very analog. The bass tone on here, I think, is just exceptionally warm. The guitars got more of like a hard rock bite, but again, it has that sort of analog fuzz to it. And the album just kind of flows beautifully. Like, you can just put this on start to finish. The songs aren't overtly long. They don't drone on forever on particular parts. Like, it just kind of stays very steady. I picked it up mainly because it's on Small Stone Records, and that's another stoner metal, stoner rock label I actually trust. There's a lot of killer bands that I've found on that label before, and this one added to the list. This might be the only state where I probably have 2 instrumental bands on the list, but I had to bring up this one too just because I enjoyed this album so much when I got it. Another thing they add are nice bluesy leads every now and then. Like, most of this is just sort of like riff atmosphere and kind of just groove along. But occasionally you get some like leads in there that kind of spice up a bit. But yeah, this is just a fantastic listen front to back. If you're a fan of like Caius and probably literally anything John Garcia has ever fronted, as well as like Clutch, definitely check this out. This is just a solid listen. Just put it on in the background, and when it's over, I would say even loop it back and just play it again, because it's just kind of good mood music to just kind of rock out to, but chill to. It's a nice little happy spot in between there, at least. Definitely check it out, though. It's fucking awesome. All right, and that is, literally all I have for West Virginia. And this was a little bit shorter, but I did have enough for one video. Honestly, some of these states I'm gonna have to bundle because there's just some states out there that don't have a lot of metal. Shame on you, those states. It's either that or they do have metal, and I just haven't found any bands from that state yet. But I can understand where some states, it's just not the thing. But this was a fun one to do that, was a little bit outside of like going after a particular scene. I might do another one like this. I just got to figure out which state is next. And of course, bigger ones on the horizon. We still got like New York, and there's a ton of shit I could talk about there. And California, where there are entirely too many fucking bands. Like, literally, I could do a video for like almost every conceivable genre of metal in California. It's just a giant hub of fucking bands there, and I mean, a lot of fucking quality ones, so yeah, I'm not really complaining there. I mean, there's some bad ones, of course, but I'm not gonna bring them up because I'm not gonna bring them up. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our store is there. We will eventually get back to like putting stuff in there and getting some new merch. We've been kind of like putting everything towards Denver Death Fest, which is taking place April 20th through April 22nd in Denver, Colorado, because it would not make any sense to call it Denver Death Fest then, right? I know, variations on the same joke I've been telling for the better part of a year now. But yeah, we're looking forward to doing that. A lot of killer bands on there. If you would like tickets, there is a link down below. We'll all be there hanging out, watching bands, drinking beers. We got food trucks now. It's gonna be a good time. So yeah, definitely check that out. And of course, thank you all so much for liking, subscribing, following, all that jazz. It is amazing doing this. It's been a lot of fun here lately, just in terms of all the different reviews coming out. This year has already yielded some really killer albums, and we're looking forward to seeing what the rest of the year brings. A whole new batch of rankings to go over. Hopefully we can get those out a little bit quicker, but again, like, scheduling can be kind of tough on that, but we'll definitely get them done. But either way, I just want to say thank you one more time, because that's what I do at the end of these videos, and I fucking mean it. You all rule, and we will catch you later.